Welcome to Spitfire TV. I'm David Dalby, and thanks for tuning in. Please take a moment, click that subscribe button, and help us promote underground punk rock music. Dominion Energy is the local gas company here in Salt Lake City, and honest to God, they put out a newsletter called the Gaslight News. Do you think somebody should tell them what that means? As a verb? Oh look, pipelines are safe and effective. All right, let's roll with bottom dollar. Bottom dollar! I'll bet my bottom dollar that this guy has never helped anyone with a drug addiction in any way.
Don't kid yourself. Don't kid yourself. Don't kid yourself. Addiction is an epidemic.
These moochers are a referral company. So why are you wearing a doctor's outfit? And what's up with the stethoscope? Like, are you gonna listen? Oh, I gotta check your heart. Black and vile, just as I suspected, you junkie. All right, another one, bottom dollar. I'll bet my bottom dollar that I'm not the only one who has considered checking my own prostate. Now, I know what you're thinking, but David, you just want to stick your thumb in your bum. That is a young man's game. And I know nothing about prostates, but I'll bet you can YouTube it. I know as much about prostates as pretty much everyone else does. Boys have them, girls don't. To get it checked involves a doctor with a finger and your butthole. You don't want cancer there, and they make a lousy Valentine's Day gift. But when you get to be a certain age, you hear a lot about it. People saying, "Did you get your prostate checked? How's your prostate? How old are you? Have you checked your prostate?" Checked? For what? Spots? Oil? Lumps? It kind of sounds like a Thanksgiving turkey. Have you checked the prostate? It's not ready yet. All right, keep them coming. Bottom dollar. I'll bet my bottom dollar that 95% of these tiki torch Nazis were just as confused as I was about their messaging. But it was kind of discombobulated at first. Do not replace us! Do not replace us! Not really a call and response. Not really all together. And then it morphed. Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! So now the message is Jews want to replace us. Do they want our jobs? Do they want our houses? Like, they want to come in and be me? Or is it the more cynical, diabolical version where the Jews are the puppet masters and they want to replace all of the white people with Mexicans? Because that makes a lot of sense, and that would fulfill their great Jewish plan, I'm sure. But speaking of Nazis, now I'm no political strategist, but I think I'm starting to understand the GOP plan for retaining power in the 2020 elections.
Socialism, they want to replace individual rights with total government domination.
The rise of socialism. They want a complete transformation of American society that will require massive wealth confiscation.
The truth about socialism: sick people are taking dog medicine. Massive toilet paper shortage.
Socialist clowns.
The starving kids, the dying babies.
Socialism is bad because socialism is tyranny.
Followed by sham elections, arrests, dictatorship, corpses in the street.
Pretty scary stuff, but I'm not afraid. I caught a real live one out in the wild. I just had to set a trap outside a locally owned coffee shop and bait it with an NPR travel mug. Our guest today is Michael Christian, local activist and bona fide socialist.
Good to be here.
Thanks for joining us. So you're a bit of an activist on a local political level. I think when it comes to things like socialism, I like to take the advice of the experts like Fox Pundit and America's favorite racist uncle, Sean Hannity.
Radical far-left Democratic Party and the dangers of socialism. The heavy oppressive hand of the federal government wants to nationalize all business, the healthcare industry, the energy industry. Free healthcare, free childcare, free vacations, free paid leave, free higher education, free government healthy food, free.
Well, what do you have to say for yourself?
Free government healthy food terrifies me.
It's
amazing how scary things are when you just have to say them angrily. Like free healthcare, free education, free food. I think we need to get at what is socialism. And socialism for me, it's the belief that democracy needs to be in the workplace. we've seen sort of the protections and the avenues of power for workers to be able to have a say in the political sphere and in the private sphere slowly dwindle away, largely because of the decline of labor unions. What happens is that workers go to whatever shit job that they have to work at. More often than not, it is a shit job. It becomes a shittier job because of the lack of protections for workers. And the problem is that we as workers need to be able to collectively organize, to be able to resist what's happening and be able to have greater control over.
But Trump's on the working man's side. I saw him pulling a shovel motion and
no, he's
sitting behind a truck, wheel, driving.
Trump has always been a fucking fraud. The problem is that we've been given such crap for so long. This crap, this spectacle that's happened in society. It's more than just the reality TV, which really Trump came from. What happens is that we end up going to work, we're alienated, we have our bullshit jobs. So what do? We turn on television. And television is mostly just mindless crap that's meant to just give us a break.
I'll have you not talk about Game of Thrones in such a way.
I have yet to watch Game of Thrones, and I'm sorry to disappoint you. We can talk about inequality. We can talk about how capitalism is becoming a threat to our planet. And we can talk about how, in terms of indigenous struggles, we have a capitalist class who have been able to use the state to appropriate lands for their own use, regardless of what the treaties were saying. People like to say that, like, Donald Trump came in because of Fox News, because he had a propaganda machine. But I'm going to say that that Fox News alone could not have gotten Trump into office.
It seems like he had a bunch of scared white people. That's where he's tapping in on. He's telling these working people that are struggling to make ends meet that, hey, you're white, your country's being taken from you. We've got all these brown immigrants. Now you're supposed to be politically correct and watch your P's and Q's. Well, watch, I can be your champion. I can say racist stuff off the cuff. The thing that really just gets to me is I see all these people that are, like I said, struggling to make ends meet. They have so much more in common with these Mexican workers, with these African American workers, with these, we're all struggling. We're all on this hamster wheel just trying to go. And when we're pitted against each other and taking this race baiting and things like that, we're not looking up at the 1%, the cause of all the problems, in my opinion.
What Trump was able to do was tap into years of racial resentment, particularly in a white middle class audience. Really, a lot of these supporters of Trump were like suburbanites. These were really middle class, affluent individuals.
But a lot of white people that don't really know how to self-identify. And the vibrato of youth will never allow for them to just walk around only feeling guilt and shame, and so then what's the alternative? Is it the alt-right? Is it these creepy frog pictures? I think where we're missing it, especially from the left, instead of saying you need to feel this way, you should feel this, you're privileged, you this, you're that, is think about it from the way that nobody wants to win a race if it's known they had a head start. You see how quick people get defensive, white people, like, hey, I bust my ass all day, every day. I can barely make ends meet. I'm not the problem. I'm not the privileged one. It's like, well, okay, but on top of that, do you have to worry about getting shot when you get pulled over from the police? Racism is not a zero-sum game. It's not like the white people are like, well, someone's got to get shot by the cops, so better them than us. I don't think anybody wants that taint of that asterisk of a game won with foul play. And I think if we appeal to it that way.
And I think that, like, it's never, like, somehow inherently wrong to be able to talk about, like, how weirdly capitalism and other, like, structures or political economies privilege certain bodies over others. And what are the incentives, histories about that? I'm not against that. I actually think that's always important. That's an ongoing discussion. It always needs to happen. I think the challenge is, how do we create a collective subjectivity, so to speak? How can you create a collective imagination so people can say, this is a problem and we have a common interest. We need to address that problem.
One of the things about the socialists, back to this, is that so many people have this concept that the socialists want to take all of your hard-earned treasure, and it comes up in this sign. You know, somebody did do a Bernie Sanders sign where they rip it in half, say, "I took half of your sign because you had one and I didn't. I'm sure you understand," and it's almost like you're telling workers, you know, you're not getting paid enough, and their reply to you is, "You want to take all my stuff." It's like, well, that's the complete opposite of what I was trying to say.
I think that what's important to understand is that socialism should be about who is in control of things. That's what I think that, like, what happens is that we get caught into these sort of like trite cliches, like, oh, everybody has the exact same stuff and everybody's the same. For me, socialism is about trying to make sure that everybody has a dignified life.
A variation on that argument against socialism is, okay, well, maybe you're not coming to take all my stuff, but you're coming to take all the rich people's stuff, and they earn that fair and square, and you've got no right to it. And this argument is highlighted by right-wing commentator and conservative yapdog Ben Shapiro.
Income inequality in the United States is also quite high, right? There are people who are Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and then there's the local checker at your grocery store. But if the local checker at your grocery store is getting richer, then it seems to me they have nothing particularly to complain about in how the economy is operating. They don't have a right to Jeff Bezos' money. They don't have a right to Bill Gates' money any more than Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos has a right to their money.
Ben Shapiro just appeals to the lowest common denominator. Let's be clear about that. And I think that he's just going to an ongoing myth that those who are rich, those billionaires and millionaires, got there because of their own volition, their own goodwill.
Well, of course they did.
And weren't somehow doing this because they somehow exploited a bunch of people.
It helped that they didn't pay any taxes, but
it
yeah,
helped a little bit.
But
I don't know where Shapiro gets the idea that like cashiers are just making money. Like it baffles me that he says it. But
he said if they're getting richer, then they have nothing to complain about. Okay, well, we're taking some pretty big assumptions here.
Yeah.
One, that they're getting richer.
Ben Shapiro wants us to think that like the true enemy is the person who's like checking out our groceries. It's like you've seen how in the past several decades the richest Americans keep getting astronomically, exponentially richer.
The graph looks like this.
And you see barely, if any, real wage growth happening for most other Americans. The economy has more or less left out so many people. A lot of people who thought that like things are going to work well for them. Why? Because they grew up in the 90s, they grew up in the 2000s thinking that everything was hunky-dory. What we're seeing is that because of the 2008 crisis and the fact that like there's so many people who have been adversely affected and still feel those repercussions over a decade later, I think this is where people are now seriously considering that there's something wrong with capitalism.
Market forces are great. Yeah. Market forces will dictate demand and where the money is produced. But we, I think, have an obligation to harness the power of market forces, not just let them run amok and make them work for the people. Trump dangled this thing as he's, honking his horn like he's a truck driver and he's Joe working class, and here's these great tax cuts, and this year I owe double what I owed last year and years prior. All other things are equal. No new dependents, no changes anywhere, and instead of about $1,100, I'm paying over $2,000. They're taking 33% of everything I make plus $2,100 at the end of the year, and that doesn't even get me health care.
What baffles me is that like we've been sold the idea that like this is a threat to our individuality. Things like healthcare, education give people like the resources and the skills they want or need to be able to express themselves in like ways they can't before. The problem is that like capitalism, we got to pull ourselves by our own bootstraps. You can't pull yourself up your bootstrap when they've left you ass naked.
And worse, there is no unity within the working class. And I first noticed this a few years ago in Wisconsin when the governor at the time, Scott Walker, dismantled the union of the public sector. This caused a lot of outrage, a lot of people protesting, a lot of yelling. And then I heard people being interviewed from the private sector that were bad-mouthing the protesters, almost sounding jealous, like saying, well, we don't have this benefit or that benefit, and why should they? And it almost felt like, again, the lowest common denominator. Rather than seeing somebody else in a working environment having a benefit that you are probably entitled to, instead of demanding that for yourself, you're going to try to make sure that gets taken away from them. I just want to scream and yell at the working people, and especially the ones that backed Trump. And I think maybe we just need to put it into a language that they would understand. I mean, they all love Braveheart, so let's appeal to them on that level.
You're so concerned with squabbling for the scraps from Longshank's table that you've missed your God-given right to something better.
They put us into this hyper-competitive situation where we see one another not as allies or people with potential solidarity, but instead somebody to compete with over a finite amount of resources that are becoming more and more difficult to acquire because it keeps going disproportionately to a few privileged individuals. And the issue is that what you see in Wisconsin is that Scott Walker was a master of the politics of resentment. The Republicans aren't concerned about ethics, morals, or about the future.
They don't even pretend to be anymore.
Most of these individuals should
they used to pretend to care.
Most of these individuals should be well-educated individuals. They should know stuff that, like, climate change is real and that climate change is a largely... I
mean, serious. I mean, we might as well be arguing gravity with these people.
I think that we need to recognize is also a form of nihilism on the Democrats, which is I think the best word for it is a quietism. It's not denying that things are bad. It's denying that things are awful.
I know that you're not here in the capacity of a spokesman for the Democratic Socialist Party or the organization, but you are active with them.
I am a member of the Democratic Socialists of America.
I've got to stop right here and just ask a question. And I believe you're probably a bit younger than me, but I grew up I was a teenager.
I'm 28.
We're pretty close, but except for the fact that I was a teenager in the 80s, and don't do the math, anyone, please. And I'm a Cold War kid, and I can't help but recognize and see that it's ingrained in me that, like, even no matter how much I get passionate and I agree with, which I do, down in my core, I do not self-identify as a socialist. And it's just buzzwords, it's just labels, but if it does have such a strong trigger, then why use that label?
Because in the end, socialism is about an alternative to a system that a lot of people are not able to identify with. Increasingly, I think, and it's capitalism.
Couldn't you fight capitalism with the same ideals with a different label?
I think the term is hegemony. The hegemony is like the common sense, and that common sense is what makes people gravitate towards a particular system. So the idea is that, like, a hegemony for capitalism is this hyper-individualism. The hegemony is less than the sum of its parts. And that's why I've been talking about, like, individualism is more than consumerism. It requires having the resources and means. What socialists need to do is demonstrate that the values that capitalism is uphold, freedom, liberty, equality, can't be monopolized by capitalism. We can point out that there are contradictions to this by the idea of pulling yourself by your bootstraps when you don't have the bootstraps to begin with. The problem is that the idea of an American dream is hard to defend when it seems that those who are successful at that dream are doing whatever they can to make sure nobody else is successful.
Okay, it looks like we're out of time. Well, considering the subject of this episode, it was a no-brainer which band to bring down into the basement. One of my favorite Greater Salt Lake area bands, the Socialists. I've got Josh with me here. One question I get from a lot of people, we were on a comp together about 5 years ago, and I've heard a ton of people come up to me and ask, I love that band, how can I get a hold of them? I've looked everywhere, I've looked on Facebook, I've looked online, I've looked on iTunes, where the fuck are they?
We got 40-something songs coming out on Bandcamp very shortly.
We will post a link in the description. All right, here we go. The Socialists. Like one day. Like I'm pretty even split. One day like
Same cycle for 35 years.
I want to give props to the Salt Lake City Pyrate Punx. They do a great job of promoting underground punk rock bands. And if you are thinking about bringing your band through Salt Lake, I'll post the link on the description and hit them up.